right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our April meeting. And we're going to get started here. Just a couple notes. If you're participating in the Sabine Creek Hunting Farm class this weekend, it's going to be moved to the next weekend. I'm sure Blake will probably mention it too, that our flowers and bee process is a few days behind because of the cold weather. So we're trying to get things rolling, and our nooks are just not quite ready yet. So if you're participating in the class for the 17th, it will be moved to the next weekend. We'll combine classes. Shouldn't be an issue as far as keeping your distance and stuff. Most of our information will be outside. And the email will be sent to you from my dad, so that'll be taken care of. So let's get this started. Blake, if you're ready, I'm ready to get on with the tips.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to April. As Skip mentioned, I can confirm that things are crazy right now. It's April. It's the middle of the absolute busiest season for bees and thus beekeepers. So we've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to try to move through it fairly quickly. If you have any questions as we go through, feel free to put them in the chat box, and I can kind of monitor that as I go along, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So with that, let's get into April. This picture was actually taken in one of my bee yards about a week ago, maybe even a little less than a week ago. And the amazing thing is, when I was looking back at this as I was preparing today, is I was back in that same yard today, and there's about 6-inch bright green grass, and all the trees are bright green. So we kind of have just seen this a little later than normal explosion of vegetation. And certainly, everything is blooming right now. I mean, the bluebonnets are blooming. That yellow mustard on the lower left here, that's just such a fantastic early nectar and pollen flow. I mean, there's fields are yellow with it now. The dewberries are blooming. Red buds are actually wrapping it up. But everything all the early spring flowers are essentially in full bloom at this point. And it wasn't really until this past week or so that a lot of these, with the exception, of course, of the red bud, really came into full bloom. And so what I'm also seeing is some of our major nectar producing plants, especially the scabiosa or the pincushion, is really catching up fast. I mean, I've seen some that's about ready to bloom, and it's what, April 12th. So it's kind of a strange year. That freeze really just changed everything in a strange way. So like a lot of you, we've been doing a lot of bee work. So we've been picking our really best hives and that look like this on the left, and we've been making splits and making nooks. And this is us making nooks at night, and then moving them to a new location during the day. And so we've spent a whole lot of nights and a whole lot of days working here in the past couple of weeks, and installing mated queens or queen cells into nooks. And the picture on the right there, that is believe it or not, there's a nook under there. So we had a nook that had an old queen in it. So usually when we build our nooks, we put new queens in them, and occasionally an old queen will slip in. And when you have an old queen in a nook with a whole field full of nooks with no queen, all the bees are attracted to the pheromone that old queen is putting off. And so sometimes you'll see these hives, these nooks where all the bees have conglomerated onto a nook. So and then this is just real quick, a couple of interesting little videos that we took of a queen hatching out as we were getting ready to put them in. And that's no real application there. It's just fun to see those queens hatch out. She's supposed to be hatching out inside of a nook or a hive, but these were a few that we had left over that went into one of our incubators, and we didn't need them, and so they hatched out in the incubator. So it's the season. Okay, so kind of current conditions, like we already briefly discussed, brood rearing is pretty much caught up to where it should be. The plants are, oops, excuse me, the plants are a little bit behind, but brood rearing is largely caught up. There's a tremendous pollen flow right now. I mean, there could be just every bee coming in is calling in pollen. There's an early nectar flow in some areas already. When I was out working bees in the Trenton area today, when we could actually get a shake from frame. So when we would shake a frame, nectar would rain out of it. So that there's certainly an increasing nectar flow in some regions. Now, it's not really the primary nectar flow that we expect to make a surplus off of. It's that won't start for another few weeks at least, if not 3 weeks. But there are certainly some really substantial early nectar sources that are great for building up bees. All that being said, if we don't get some pretty good rain in a lot of the regions soon, we might be in trouble. But swarming is, of course, in full swing. I mean, bees are swarming left and right. So make sure that you pay close attention to some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute about preventing swarms and checking for swarms, because there is a lot of swarming going on right now. It really just kickstarted in a big way the past week or two, and I'm sure expecting it to go through April. The major nectar flow appears to be largely on schedule at this point, which is interesting because with the freeze and kind of the delay in those early blooming plants, I was curious to see if we would see a delay in our major nectar flows. But if I could make a prediction, I don't think there's going to be a huge delay. Usually it starts, the scabiosa and then Indian blanket all start blooming in the very end of April or early May. It looks pretty on schedule if you look at the plants. So I would plan on early May having your hives ready for honey production. And we'll talk about that more in a minute too. But this is what I'm seeing inside the April hives. There's tons of brood, tons of eggs, tons of larvae. It's a beautiful time of year. I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, "Hey, how are your bees looking?" And he just laughed and said, "Well, it's April. They look great." They always do. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, bees just thrive in the early spring conditions. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing. Even hives that are really weak with only a couple frames of brood can explode into a full strength hive in the 3 or 4 week period, just because there's so much natural resources that are coming in for them. So kind of keeping a few different things in mind. Oops, sorry, let me go back. A lot of you are getting new hives, nooks, or packages this year. Maybe you're new to beekeeping, maybe you're trying to boost up your numbers. And so I wanted to go over just briefly, if you do have a brand new hive you're purchasing or a nook or a package, kind of here's some things to keep in mind in a step-by-step way after you get them home. The first step I always encourage is feed within 24 hours of getting your new bees home. No matter whether it's a hive, nook, or package, they need a lot of food to keep growing and keep that forward momentum going. And so feeding within 24 hours is really important. You're going to wait 3 to 4 days after installing that nook or package into your hive or setting up your complete hive, and then go back and check for larvae or eggs and ensure the queen survived the trip, or in the case of a package, make sure she was accepted and she's laying. The next step is you're going to continue feeding. Depending on the strength of the hive and the weather, they could drink anywhere from a cup to a gallon per day. A full, deep box full of bees and brood can easily drink a gallon a day. A new nook may drink a quarter of a gallon a day. A package may drink, a couple of cups. So the goal is to balance, giving them plenty of food to let them continue drawing out all the comb they've got to draw out. Without filling the brood nest too much with syrup, which I don't usually see in spring. I really worry more about honey-bound hives or overfeeding in the late summer and fall. It's pretty rare to see that in the springtime. And so next, when the bottom box of your hive is 80% drawn comb and full of bees, it's time to add your second brood box and continue feeding. It may take 6 weeks before you can add that second brood box or packages. It may take 3 to 4 weeks for nooks or 0 to 2 weeks for complete hives. But the goal is that you keep feeding, keep helping them grow until they fill up both of their brood boxes, 2 brood boxes full of bees and nectar and honey. And at that point, when your second brood box is 80% drawn comb, you're ready to add your first super, and you can stop feeding, assuming it's mid-June or before. You know, if you finally get those 2 brood boxes full of bees and brood, and it's, you know, the 3rd or 4th week of June, the nectar flow is pretty much over at that point, and I wouldn't keep adding boxes. But you know, if it's before mid-June and you get to that point, you can go ahead and add the 3rd box, which would be your honey super, and potentially make some surplus honey on that new hive. Somebody had a question: if you can't fully inspect the hive, how do you identify that they're filling combs and not leaving enough room for the queen to lay? So yeah, I mean, sometimes going down into a bottom box can be a challenge, you know, if they're really full or stuck together, etc. In general, I'm not feeding more than about a gallon of syrup per week per hive in the spring months. And in general, that I don't usually see them become honey bound. If you're feeding, you know, 3 or 4 gallons a week to a really strong hive, they're going to get honey bound. But about a gallon a week is a pretty good pace for any hive this time of year, to allow them to keep growing, keep drawing out comb, etc. So, you know, watch your top box. You know, if you can't get all the way down to the bottom box, just keep an eye on your top box, and the bees are gonna move food around as they need to make room for the queen to lay. So if your top box is completely packed full of honey, I will definitely slow down the feeding, because you know, if the top box is packed, then the bottom box is probably close too. If the top box is pretty much empty, you know, keep on feeding. You know, they'll move it around. Similarly, you know, if you made splits this spring, like a lot of folks, I'm sure many of you did, then feed and install a new queen in your split within 12 to 24 hours. Check back to ensure the queen has been released and is laying 7 to 10 days later. And then same like we just talked about with a nook or a package, keep feeding continually until the bottom box is 80% full of bees. Add the second box at that point. When that's 80% full, you can add your honey supers and stop feeding. And we'll talk a lot more about supering in May, because that's when we really do most of our honey supering, is May. Often the point in April, the objective in April, is to get them to fill up that second brood box. And that's, you know, the goal. My goal is always by the end of April, I want my second brood box pretty much full of bees and stored syrup or honey, so that when I add my honey super, they'll put all that incoming nectar up into my honey super instead of having to finish filling up their brood nest, you know, with the honey stores that they need. If you have established hives that you didn't split, you know, you can equalize the brood if you need to. Monitor for varroa, especially on established hives, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then just like the other hives, you know, when that top brood box is 80% full, go ahead and start adding your super. One other quick thing I wanted to address is just spotting eggs and larvae. This is always a big one for this time of year. As we make splits and get new hives, you know, it's really important to make sure that we have an actively laying queen. And the picture you see here it's easy to see those eggs because it's brand new honeycomb. It's those, you know, white eggs against black foundation, makes it super easy. But when it's old dark comb, it's much, much harder to see eggs and larvae. And so I just wanted to show you guys what I did here real quick. You can see this picture over here on the left. I just snapped some pictures with my smartphone. And then you can go inside where it's dark and you can really zoom in on the picture on your smartphone, and you can see down into those cells much better. So you don't always have to find the queen when you're looking in a hive. So instead of finding the queen, snap a couple dozen pictures to make sure you get a good one. Make sure the sunlight is shining directly down into the bottom of the cells. Take a couple dozen pictures from varying heights above the center brood nest frames in the center of the hive, and then go back in and start zooming in. And that's a great way to spot some of those eggs and larvae if you need to find them. Larry, you were asking, you found some white mold in one dead hive. Will the newbies clean it up? Yeah, you know, it's really common to see white mold or blue mold gray mold in those dead hives is really common, and the bees actually do a great job of cleaning it up. So scrape off any dead bees that are still in the hive. If you really want to, you can kind of rinse those frames and then shake the water out of them. But the bees do a great job of cleaning that up almost right away, just putting it in the hive. I've never seen any ill effects of that. So it is definitely swarm season. Let me turn the volume off on that. It's definitely swarm season. So if you haven't had swarm calls yet as a beekeeper, I'm sure you're going to get them soon because we're in the middle of swarm season. So this picture on the left here is a hive that's swarming, of course. And then the other images are swarm cells, a hive that is preparing to swarm. So, like all of you probably know at this point, the key to preventing swarms is proactively giving them enough space. It's hard to stop a hive from swarming once they want to swarm. And so it's really important that you're making sure they're not getting more than 80% full in that top box. If they're more than 80% full in the top box, they're at tremendous risk of swarming, especially this time of year. I mean, April is when bees are dying to have an excuse to swarm. So just make sure that your top box, if it's more than 80% full, get a super on it right away. And then you can check your hives for swarm cells, and if you see swarm cells, you can wipe them out. The challenge is, once a hive starts rearing swarm cells, it's hard to shut that swarm mentality down. And there's a good chance you're going to miss a cell, wiping out a swarm cell, and then the bees are going to swarm. They typically swarm about the time they cap a queen cell is about the time they swarm. So if you go into a hive and you see uncapped queen cells, then the only way I found to really stop them is making a split. So if you've got a really strong hive and you see a bunch of uncapped swarm cells and they haven't swarmed yet, then making a quick split is the best way to shut down that swarm mentality. I do want to mention really quickly, just for any newbies on the phone or on the call, queen cells versus queen cups. So I mentioned, if you see queen cells in a hive that's really strong, there's a good chance they're swarming. I'm defining a cell, or a cell is defined as a cell where the bees are rearing a new queen. And so you can see here's some uncapped ones here on the left. And then on the right, I kind of lifted them open so you can see the inside. You can see those larvae. And so these are queen cells. There's a queen actively being reared in these cells. Now, there's also going to be emergency queen cups all throughout a hive, or a queen cup. And that's when they kind of have a cell that looks similar to this, but there's nothing in it. And it's usually going to be a little smaller than this. And there's nothing in it. And that's perfectly normal. That's perfectly okay, because the bees have those in case something happens to their queen. They can start rearing a new queen immediately without having to build this whole cup for her. So I'm only concerned if I see something in queen cells. And so when you're going through your hives, if you see these little queen cups, always just open them up with your hive tool. And if you see developing larvae in them, that's a sign something's going on. Either the hive's getting ready to swarm, or they're trying to replace their old queen. April varroa mites, I would encourage everybody to test. Again, most hives don't have levels that need treatment this time of year, but if you haven't done a test all year, definitely do a test and see what your mite levels are. If your mite levels are more than 2 per 100 bees and you want to make a honey crop, April is your final window to treat and still have the proper withdrawal period, unless you're using something like oxalic acid or hop guard that can be used when honey supers are on. And then, of course, as always, check out the Honeybee Health Coalition, their Varroa diagnostic tool, and it kind of walks you through all the treatment options, organic, non-organic, natural, etc., and helps you decide which one to use. So that's a fantastic tool. Okay, I think this is the last one, and we're about on time. So if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and start putting them in the chat box, and I can answer those in just a moment. The final thing I want to mention is just this is the ideal time to requeen. So I do recommend trying to requeen proactively every year. That does not mean there aren't some queens that successfully can be productive for 2 years, but it's not the norm. Frequently people will say, well, I had a queen and I never requeened and they were fine. And she's 3 or 4 years old. Usually what happens is the bees replaced her at some point. You know, they killed her and superseded her and raised a new queen. Occasionally a queen can live a long time, but again, it's not the norm. And it can be hard to find queens in the late in the year, in the middle of the summer, you know, unless you booked queens and have them coming, there's no guarantee you're going to find a queen to replace that old queen if she starts failing. And so that's one of the reasons I really recommend proactively requeening on a schedule, is because even if that year-old queen looks like she's doing great in April, she might not be doing well in June. And you may not be able to find a queen in June when she starts failing, and then you lose your hive. So requeening proactively gives you the control to say, hey, I've ordered queens, they're coming in on this date, I can requeen, and then you're generally safe for another year. And most queens live, you know, about a year and productively, and then they peter out. So this is a great time to do that requeening. Okay, that was the last thing. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Somebody asked, how much longer can you use Hop Guard? So, you know, all mite treatments work best when there's minimal brood in the hive. That's when mite treatments work best. Some work better than others when there's a lot of brood in the hive. Apivar works pretty well when there's a lot of brood in the hive. ApiGuard works decently well when there's a lot of brood in the hive. Oxalic acid and Hop Guard don't work as well. They can work, but you're just not going to get the same kill rate on the varroa mites as you would some of the other treatments. So I would say, as far as using Hop Guard and Oxalic when there is a lot of brood in the hive, I would say it depends a bit on what your mite levels are. You know, if you've got 2 or 3 per 100 bees, sure, oxalic acid or Hop Guard should be able to take them down to 0 to 1. If you've got 10 mites per 100 bees, you got to use something a little more aggressive to get that under control. You've got to use ApiGuard, Apivar, something a little more substantial to really knock those numbers down. Someone asks, when should you start getting nervous about the lack of rain? Winter was wet, but spring seems pretty dry so far. Yeah, I mean, I'm not incredibly worried about it yet, but I'm gonna be in a week if we don't get some good rains. I mean, there's some good chances of rain this later this week and early into next week. So I think if we had good early rains, like you mentioned, and that really got all the wildflowers up, and I think if we can get some good rains here in the next week or so, then that'll be plenty to push the wildflowers through to at least start. And obviously we'll need rain in May, but if we don't get some good rains in the next week to 10 days, I'm gonna start getting nervous because it's getting pretty dry out there, and we have not had substantial rain. So yeah, pray for rain in the next 10 days. And if we don't get it, we could be looking at a smaller honey crop this year for sure. So any other questions? I think I've got them all caught up on the chat. But if anybody has any other questions, feel free to pop them in there. Otherwise, I will turn it back over to you, Skip.
All right, thanks, Blake. And if you're praying for rain, pray for it in the evening times, late night, not during the day when I'm working.
So true, and please on the weekends too. Yeah, a Friday evening would be ideal.
Thanks, Blake. It's always good hearing about the tips and some things that you're going through. I know being in the yard, there's doing splits and going through mite treatments and getting all this stuff done. You know, it's like I said, you just kind of run in circles, but you got to think about it way ahead of time. And I know that, so we've been planning out bees and queens, and, it just seems like it can't get fast enough.
So true. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Blake.
You bet.
All right, so we'll get to the main portion of our meeting. Laryssa is going to be with us to speak. I'm not going to mess up the last name. I'll let her say it when she gets on. I know that she's Beekeeping Made Simple, and she's got some blogs out there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think she's out of Hawaii. So I'll let her introduce herself and give her more details of what she does, and I like the way that she can explain it, and y'all can get some interesting tips from her. So Laryssa, if you're ready, you should be able to get on and share your screen.
Hi everybody, my name is Laryssa and I am a beekeeper here on the Big Island of Hawaii, and I am going to be talking to you about the business of beekeeping. I've been keeping bees for about 10 years. I started when I lived in Philadelphia and then moved to Hawaii to take on an internship at a bee farm here. And before I worked full-time as a beekeeper. I was a graphic designer. I worked for marketing firms and graphic design firms, and then went on to work for the country's largest organic honey farm, and then started my own bee farm here called Be Happy Hawaii. And so I am going to talk to you guys about getting started, some of the laws you should be considering before you start selling your honey, ways to increase that final sale, whether it's online or at your farmer's market, and other ways to make money from beekeeping other than selling honey, because one of our top sources of income that really was what allowed me to make beekeeping a full-time job as opposed to a hobby that made me some money was not by selling honey. So let's get started. And if you have any questions, please, as you have them, add them to the comments right there on the right-hand side in Zoom. And then after I'm done the presentation, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. So here's a photo of me working for Big Island Bees, a bee farm here on the Big Island where they harvest blossom-specific organic honeys. And I worked here for about 7 years before starting my own business. And here on the Big Island, just real fast, if you guys are curious, a lot of people ask me questions about beekeeping here on the Big Island, especially since I kept bees in Pennsylvania as well. It's a pretty interesting place to keep bees, very unique. We are very isolated. And so beekeeping was really an ideal place to keep Hawaii was an ideal place to keep bees for a very long time. We did not have the rural mite or the small hive beetle, very few cases of foul brood. However, in I believe 2011 is when the rural mite arrived and the hive beetle came shortly thereafter. So I came here, as I mentioned, for an internship, and I worked for a smaller farm on the Big Island, and then I went on to work for a larger farm further north. And in case you're curious or maybe think that that's kind of an obscure place to go to for beekeeping, the Big Island of Hawaii, specifically Kona, which is on the western coast of the Big Island, is home to some of the largest queen breeding operations in the world. This is from the county website. They said in 2018 they estimated there was about $8 to $13 million worth of queen bees exported out of Hawaii. I'm fairly certain that's a lot lower than what it really is. Kona Queens, Big Island Queens was bought out by the Oliveras family, which has bee farms in California. They have operations here, and then a lot of smaller operations are all over the place here in Hawaii. And actually, one of the hardest things for me personally as a beekeeper, which has been really one of the hardest things I've had to deal with the entire time I've had bees on my own here in Hawaii, is finding a place to put bees, because there are so many beekeepers, and not just hobby beekeepers, but commercial apiaries, which have yards of about 50 to 100 hives in them, everywhere, all over here in Kona. And so you'll find large levels of mite and beetle infestations, and also just a lack of food for the bees. And as a hobby beekeeper, it can be difficult to get your hives started, because you'll just find that your hives won't collapse, but they won't ever grow past one deep box. And then as someone that's looking to make an income from their bees, it's difficult to bring in much, to find a place where your bees will actually be gathering much food. Though it can be found, it just takes a while to find those spots and people willing to let you put bees on their property. So even if you don't want to become a full-time beekeeper or have a large apiary, and beekeeping isn't a cheap hobby. And so even me personally, I was making my own boxes, but there's still mite treatments, your veils break, you need another box of frames, equipment falling apart, you need jars for honey, all that stuff starts to add up. And so it's always great to know ways that you can offset these costs that don't require a ton of time, and turn your beekeeping hobby and something that you enjoy and a passion into something that becomes more of a hassle and an annoyance, and takes you from enjoying time with your family or relaxing. But right now, we are fortunate in that there's enough documentaries and movies and talk in the press about the decline of the honeybee population, and people see the benefit in honeybees in our environment. And so a lot of people want to help the bees. They're interested in them. They want to learn more about them. They don't want to eat refined sugar if they can substitute it with honey instead. They're seeing that there's more to using honey than adding it to their tea. And so first I wanted to talk about some of the ways that you can harness this and make a little bit of an income from beekeeping. And I wanted to talk to you about ways that I've made an income from beekeeping over the years. And so first, obviously you can sell your honey, and I'll get more into technical stuff and recommendations for getting into this. But not just the honey from your hives, just the different varieties that you might be harvesting, but there's infusions, adding cinnamon, vanilla bean. The place I worked for had minced up chili peppers that they added to one of their honeys, which was really popular. So was the cinnamon mixed with their honey. A honey that an infusion that's popular with my online website is cacao added to honey. Their coffee mixed with honey was really popular. And then of course there's the rosemary infusions and garlic and things. And then there's comb honey and creamed honey. And then there's the beeswax products. The beeswax wraps are a really popular product right now and actually have a pretty high price point, especially considering that it doesn't cost too much to make. And those, for people that might not be familiar with those are instead of cellophane, you're dipping fabric into beeswax with a few other small things mixed in with it. And then there's beeswax candles and body products with beeswax in it. There's selling bees, news packages, queens. There's education, which is not only giving a beekeeping class, but also giving tours of your hives or your farm. The farm I worked for made a killing off of their tours. I started it for them because I was getting a little bored there. And so they had a beekeeping museum at their location. And whenever I would work at their farm store, at the register, I would get really bored just selling honey. So we brought hives over to the store section, and we would open up a hive. People would be on one side of a screen, and we would open the hive and show them the queen and a bee hatching and honey versus baby bees. And so this is an opportunity to educate a whole lot more people than you would otherwise doing beekeeping classes, because a lot of the general public wants to learn about bees and how to help them and how they make honey, but they don't want to become a beekeeper. They don't want to put on a suit and, do all that stuff. Maybe they just want something to do with their family, or it's a homeschool group, or it's a class trip and things of that sort. And so that's what this place did. And they had admission was, I think, $12 per person. They capped it at 15 people. We started with one tour, 5 days a week, and there's now 3 tours, 6 days a week, and it's pretty popular. Of course, there's pollination services. Now, this is going to require more hives than a handful or 20, and the trucks and help to moon these hives, but also another source of income for people. There's what I call bee swag, which especially if you're doing farmers markets or selling online, this is a great way to add additional products to sell, which increases the final sale cost when people are buying from you without any extra work from you, really, other than the initial design. This is, making a sticker of your logo or a t-shirt of your logo. This company called Printful, which if you have a Shopify website, I don't know if they work with other websites, but they create t-shirts on demand. So you don't actually get any t-shirts printed, but you put the design onto one of their little pictures on their website. They make it really easy, and it looks really nice. And when someone orders from your website a t-shirt in whatever size they choose, they make the t-shirt, then they ship it out. So you do absolutely nothing. You don't have inventory of shirts. So if you ever go online with your stuff, that is a really great way to offer apparel. And they do other printing of things on fabric. And then there's, swarm removals and cutouts, and that can be fairly lucrative, but, also a long day. And then there's keeping bees for other people. And actually, keeping bees for other people has been a great source of income for my business. And it may vary depending on your location, how easily you'll be able to find people interested in this. But I was contacted by a hotel. My husband knew somebody who knew somebody. They had a beekeeper on staff with their landscapers taking care of some hives, and he quit, and they needed someone ASAP to take care of the bees on their property. They also had a greenhouse, and they loved to talk about how they were incorporating the food that they were growing there on property in the kitchen. And so they would also give the honey out to people that stayed there. And so they paid me a monthly income, or they still do. I still take care of the bees for them. And I set up, I will go out there so many times a month and check the bees and harvest the honey and bottle it for you. They take care of all the equipment. And that's our setup. I brought the hives out there. If anything was to happen to a hive, it's my responsibility to bring another hive out there. Other than that, all of the equipment and bottles and everything that is needed is something that they purchase. So especially if you don't have a great place to keep bees right now, or maybe you're looking to have more bees, but your husband or wife or family members aren't too thrilled about having more hives at your home, this is a great way to put bees somewhere else and actually even make some money off of doing something that you really enjoy. Other places that I would recommend, I've gotten contacted from places and met people through the Bee Association here that just have private property. They have acreage, there's fruit trees, macadamia nut trees, and they just want bees on their property, but they don't want to take care of them. Here in Hawaii, I believe this is the case for quite a few other states as well. but in Hawaii County, you have to have bees on certified ag land. But if you have at least 5 hives per acre, you will get a tax break. You can't get a tax break as ag land unless you're doing something agriculturally related. So there are a lot of people that would love a beekeeper to put beehives on their property, and they won't have to do anything to care for them, and they get that tax break. So that's another incentive when people are looking to have, when you're looking to find people to put beehives on the property. But additionally, farms that already sell products, I have friends who I met as beekeepers here in Hawaii that are now in Virginia, and they made a business out of this as well. They show farms how within 2 years they will make up the initial cost to pay for them to set up beehives on their property and to go out there and care for them. And within 2 years, they're already generating an income from the honey sales that they will make. So these farms pay them to put bees there and to care for them and to harvest the honey. They get honey that they get to add to their farm stand or their online store or their in-person shop. And it looks great for them, and it's great. It's extra pollination for them, and they don't have to do any extra work for it. I've also been contacted by retreat centers who have, their own garden on property and businesses of that sort. It's a great way to encourage, it's a great way to have some extra press to show that they care about the environment and that they're sourcing their food locally and things of that sort. So that is the one of the two sources of income that have worked best for me. The other source of income that's worked really great for me is selling honey wholesale. Selling honey direct to customers, like in farmers markets and online, has worked okay for me. But really being able to send, 4 cases of honey to a store, or just like selling large quantities, even if it means at a much lower cost, is really what, like, those are the two big sources of income for myself and for the farms that I work for. So just one piece of advice, I recommend starting with what you love. There's a lot of ways to generate an income from beekeeping, and it can be overwhelming, or you might think that in order to have a table at a farmer's market, you need to have a ton of stuff. But I wouldn't let that deter you from getting started this summer, or when you're ready, because you can always add more to it. And really, just instead of trying to have a ton of things and a big variety, start with the thing that you love doing. I started out with honeycomb, and so this photo is a photo from a breakfast buffet at a fancy resort here in Hawaii, and in the center is the frame of my honeycomb that they have on display for people to draw from. It's pre-COVID, of course, but when I was working for the bee farm, I was working there full time, and they did, just liquid honey. They didn't do comb honey, and they didn't harvest anything else but the liquid honey from the 3 different varieties. They move their bees around 3 times a year to harvest from the 3 different blossoms. And I wanted to play around with some different things and try some things out. And I just really loved honeycomb. And I also, it fit with my lifestyle. I was living in a small studio apartment by myself. I didn't have any room to store an extractor. And so I started out with the comb honey, and it just makes selling easier. And it makes it easier to keep on going when you're tired and you don't feel like it and you're busy, when you're doing something that you love and doesn't feel like work. The other benefits of selling comb honey was that I could sell it at a premium price. So it is more time consuming, I would say, to care for your hives and to harvest comb honey. But I prefer to have, 20 hives and to sell comb honey at a premium price and to just spend more time doing the comb honey than to have 150 hives, well, not really equivalent, then to have even 50 hives and to have to bring in more honey that wasn't comb, that was just liquid honey, to make the same amount of money. But it really just depends on what works best for you and your lifestyle and what you prefer. First, real fast, of course, a lot of people are going to sell their honey. Probably a lot of you guys right now at this meeting sell your honey or have in some way, whether to relatives or at your office. And so just make sure that you're doing it legally. Food has a liability to it, even though it is honey, and there's a lot less liability to selling honey. There is a thing called the cottage food walls, and cottage food walls are walls that allow small time producers to use appliances in their homes to bake, cook, can, pickle, dry, or candy certain low risk foods for sale. And so, fortunately, these laws exist because this is what allows a hobby beekeeper or a beekeeper with not a huge amount of hives to get started without spending a ton of money and needing a certified kitchen. So the allowable products under the cottage food laws include any food excluding meat that doesn't require time or temperature control to prevent spoiling. And so here's some information for cottage food walls in Texas. There's a bunch of requirements that vary. Some of it is just in how much honey you're going to be selling. So your gross annual income from the sales of these foods must be $50,000 or less. You can be selling other things and making an income, but you can't be selling more than $50,000 worth of honey. And so no health department or local government authority can regulate the production of these items. There's no licenses, registration, or permits required by state law other than the basic food handler certification. And you should be able to find through a simple Google search in your county where that food certification class is being held. The class I took was free. It was just offered a few times a year, and then you get your certificate after you pass the test at the end of the class. There's just a few classes. There's some things about, DSHS being able to enter your home if they think that there's a serious threat, but you may sell your food directly to consumers anywhere in Texas. However, local ordinances apply. Your food must be packaged in your home kitchen in a way that prevents the product from becoming contaminated. And there are very specific labeling requirements according to state. And so you must use the exact labeling for the state of Texas, and the label must be affixed to the package unless the item is too large or bulky for packaging. But that's not the case for honey. And there's always the part about do not give to children under the age of 1, and there's like very specific wording that you're going to want to include, as well as there's usually address and a phone number and a name and things of that sort, the weight. So you just want to, through a quick Google search, you'll be able to find what the specific labeling requirements are for your area. And another thing that people don't always realize is the limitations for selling online. So you can sell your food on the internet in Texas. However, you have to personally deliver the food to your customer. And this is assuming that you're operating under cottage food laws. So all the information on your labels, except your home address, must be provided to the customer before the customer pays for the food. And really, what this means is, and this is possible, if you use a Shopify website, there is an option for people to skip the shipping and to pick up. Like there's a little checkbox if you want to pick it up. And so if you're operating under the cottage food laws, you cannot sell your honey products online and ship it out to the customer, even if they are in Texas, but especially if they're outside of the state of Texas. But what you can do is you can have a website where people pay for the product, and then they choose the pickup option, and then they can come to your house. What I did during the holiday season, I offered that to people in town, and I had some empty beehives out by the front of the driveway next to our mailbox. And when people said they were coming by, I would put their order in a box with their name on it inside the empty beehive and leave it by the front of the road for them to pick up. So it is an option for you if you are looking to sell online, but you aren't allowed to sell wholesale, which means that you can't sell it to somebody and then they're going to resell it, whether that's at a store, coffee shop, or really anywhere. You have to be present there and sell it directly to the consumer. That even includes selling it to somebody that already has a table at a farmer's market and selling it to them and them selling it at their market's table. And you also must obtain a food handler's card prior to selling your food. If you have anyone assisting you in the preparation of your product, like an employee, they also must obtain a card at any time. They will be unsupervised by you. But this doesn't include members of your household. And there's no municipal zoning ordinances that will prevent you from having a cottage food operation in your home, but neighbors can still take action against you if your business becomes a nuisance to them. And this is really something that does come up with beekeepers, because I know very few beekeepers that never dealt with a neighbor issue. So keep it in mind, you want to be on the good side of your neighbors, because they can hold that against you and take away your ability to have a cottage food operation in your home. So, don't forget, label your honey property. There's a sales limit, and you cannot sell online and ship it. But there's you can find all this information plus additional information about your local county laws at the texascottagefoodlaw.com, and all of the information about what needs to be on your label is also there. Okay, so for this part, don't really have a lot of slides because there's not much visual to go along with some of this information. But as somebody that worked for apiary with a few thousand hives, and then worked for an apiary with 130, and now started my own, and was in marketing before being in the beekeeping business, I've definitely noticed some similarities in issues people have had, and I've had myself getting started and selling products that I wanted to share with people, and hope to make it a little bit easier for you when you're getting started. And of course, most people start with selling honey because it's what you have. You probably have excess of it. You probably want to maybe even get rid of some of it because you have more than what you need, and your relatives say that they have enough as well. So when selling your honey, you're probably going to go to a farmer's market first, and that's where the cottage food laws allow you to sell at the market, or maybe at at your church or at your office. And, you know, obviously your honey has to taste good. If you have a variety that doesn't taste good, don't bother with that stuff. But it does really help to have something that makes it a little bit unique, especially if you're going to be at the markets. If you're going to be selling it to people you know, like at your work, this isn't so much necessary because people are buying it because it's convenient and they know you. But so me personally, what I did was I sold comb honey, and that was partially because I liked comb honey, but the farm I was working for said that they were always getting requests from chefs and resorts for comb honey, and the owner couldn't get the head beekeeper to start harvesting it. He refused to do it, and the head beekeeper was her husband, so he was allowed to say no, and there was nothing she could do about it. So as somebody that was looking to, you know, offset all of the money I was spending on beekeeping equipment and on a pretty terrible beekeeper salary, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll sell comb honey. The grocery store here, the like health food store here, in a very small town here in Kona, there is a huge honey section, like multiple shelves, whole little cabinet in the aisle, just full of all of these different kinds of honey. And people will lowball it, people will sell for really low. And if you try to compete against that and be the lowest price or have the biggest jar at the lowest price, you're just never going to win that race. There's always going to be someone lower, and you're not going to make enough to make it worth your while. So I did the comb honey, and my first client was my boss. I put comb into jars, which is here in this photo. I have jars where I put their label on it. We just labeled it Laryssa's honeycomb with their information on it, and then I did my own. And I then also had the clamshell container, which is what I use for selling to chefs and restaurants and stuff, because they didn't really care if it was in a nice packaging or anything. And so I sold it to them, and they sold in their farm store, and I did really well there because there was a store that was all about bees, beekeeping, and honey. And then when chefs would contact them about comb honey, they would buy it from me. And so they are still one of my best customers. And then it was a slow process to really get to know people here, because I was new to the island. And here in Hawaii, it's like a lot of the United States, a lot of small towns, it's not about how good your marketing is, it's about who you know. And people going to the people that have more of a reputation or that they know through somebody than some new person that came from the East Coast. So that's what I did, and that worked really well for me. And then from there, I could start to do, you know, different varietals and infusions and candles and things like that. But you had to start out with something that people were looking for, or was like that easy to sell. And you know, other things I've seen, the farm I worked for, they did organic honey, and they also harvested wehua, which is a flower here that's endemic to the Hawaiian Islands and can only be harvested here in Hawaii. And specifically, this island is where you'll find a lot of this blossom in areas where you can really harvest this honey and not get too much nectar from other blossoms as well. So they had those two unique qualities. And for those of you that aren't familiar with organic honey, there's very few places in this country where you can harvest organic honey. However, here in Hawaii, we have lava fields. Hawaii Island, or what a lot of people call the Big Island, is where the active volcano is. And so we just have acres and acres of of lava. And so with lava, you have very little that can survive in this harsh environment, but this one endemic tree called the ohia tree can survive. Their roots go way deep down through the lava rocks and reach the aquifers down below. They also are able to pull moisture from the clouds. And so there's one of the few plants that you'll often see in the lava fields. They produce a flower that has so much nectar in it. It's kind of like a pom-pom shape. And when you shake it, nectar will actually just like start flinging out. The bees love this tree. And so they are able to put beehives in the lava fields where there's not much else growing. And so nobody's spraying anything. No one's farming anything because there's nothing to farm. There's nothing to kill with your sprays. It's really just this tree. And so that's what allows them to put beehives there and to not have pesticides or herbicides or really have to deal with anything else getting into the honey and tainting it. And so the USDA does come out to do inspections and to test random samples of their honey to actually say that, to certify that it is USDA organic. And there's other things like they cannot feed their bees whatsoever. And there's a water source and a ton of paperwork that is involved in the organic certification. But that was what they had going for them. And then once they started to get a name for themselves, they did invest in hiring a really well-known botanical illustrator to create a label for them where he made an illustration of this Hawaiian flower. And so they have a gorgeous label, which has brought them into some of the really high-end resorts here in Hawaii in their gift shops, where you're not going to be able to get into those gift shops with a more of a handmade kind of logo. And then other things I've seen, there's a company in Louisiana. They have like a cemetery honey. I saw they have beehives in cemeteries all over the area. And I've seen, since you guys are in Texas, the killer bee honey here in Hawaii. And they were just making a joke out of the killer bees that are in the United States with a really funny kind of illustrated logo and label. And so, you don't need this in order to have a honey that people are going to buy, but it's always great to have a fun story or a fun packaging that's going to make someone not only want to buy it for themselves, for the cabinet, because it tastes good, but maybe to give as a gift to someone, or if someone's visiting and they're a tourist stopping by your market table wanting to bring that home instead of the honey with no label on it, or just a handmade label that was stamped. That's not as interesting. Not to say that a handmade label, it can't be interesting, but just it's something that makes it unique. So since I've talked about these cottage food walls, and most people are at the level that they're not going to be getting a food, that they aren't going to be at a certified kitchen, though it's not impossible. Some places do even have community kitchens, or they might be able to share a kitchen with somebody else. When I was getting started, my roommate had a cafe that he had recently opened up, and so I was able to use that at first. So there are potential options. But if you are going to be operating under the cottage food walls, then you're pretty much going to be selling at farmers markets. After doing a bunch of markets, I have a few tips for you guys that are looking to get started. I strongly recommend having at least one product that's under $10. Ideally, if you can have one that's under 10 and one that's under 5, that's even better. Chapstick was always a #1 seller and really popular. It's a really great gift that people will add to a present, or that they'll bring for someone, especially if you are going to be at a market where you're going to have tourists. What has helped me a lot online and at markets is to sell sets and different size jars. The place I worked for, they had three different size jars. They had a 1 ounce, they had a 3.5, and a 47 ounce. And their 47-ounce jars where they make their money. Especially you buy that online, you're just packing up 2 jars, putting it in a box, fits in a medium flat rate box. They sell their jars. The varieties vary, but their Lehua is, I believe, $64 now. So you're making over $120, $128 for 2 jars of honey that you're packing up. It's not a lot of time to set that up in your box and makes a decent income. But also sets. I never did this before. I was like, oh, I have 3 different varieties and I have my comb honey. So if someone wants to buy one of each, they can just buy one of each. But once I started offering just a set that was just the 3 different varieties of honey, and then the like one of each. I had one of my creamed honey, one of my comb honey, and just one of the liquid honey, and three different set options. That became really popular, and it increased my final sale from 1 or 2 jars to people spending $50, $75 on the final sale. And especially if you start selling online, you do not want to be filling a whole bunch of orders that are $30. Because once you're done adding in that packing material and creating a label and going to the post office, it's just hardly worth the time to do it all. And so if you can just have sets, it doesn't even have to be in a box. I didn't even have mine in a box, but the farm I worked for did have 3-packs. Their 9-ounce jars were in a 3-pack, and their 3.5-ounce jars were in a 3-pack, and they had just a plain red box and a little plastic sleeve around it. And those are really popular because they look a little bit more like a gift. And so people are more likely to get them for someone, especially in the holiday season. People don't know what to get for a whole lot of people. So if you can, food is an easy one. It's a really great gift for almost everybody. Like, who's not going to eat the food you give them as a gift? But you're not going to just want to put, a bottle of hot sauce with a bow on it, and hand it to somebody. But if it's in a nice box and it looks like a gift, then it's just makes a little bit more sense and a little bit easier. Now I've just bought a bottle of jam and put that in a gift for somebody, but it's just easier for people to see, like, oh yeah, that's might be a good gift for my friend who really loves food and is a big foodie. And of course, have a way for people to keep in touch with you, even if you don't have a newsletter up yet, or a website, or Facebook, or Instagram. Even if you just have a sheet of paper with lines on it and a pen attached to it that just says, like, sign up for a newsletter. Then the people that are interested in learning about your product will put their email down. There are services. MailChimp is one that I recommend. It's totally free. You can create a newsletter very easily and just tell people what market you're going to be at, or if you're going to be at a festival, or put a coupon in there or something like that, because you never know when you might actually start selling online. And you're going to want these people to come to your website. Having varieties is also great. If you don't harvest a few different varieties from your hives, then you might want to consider putting some of your bees in another yard as opposed to having them all in one spot, so that you can potentially harvest a different variety. But of course, there's, just putting a piece of comb in some of your jars, and that's another honey product. Or, like I mentioned, the creamed honeys, or the confections, adding the cinnamon or the coffee or the cacao to it. The cacao with sea salt mixed with my honey is really popular. It's just, the tricky part with some of the confections is you have to find what works well with the flavor of the honey you have. Here we have the mesquite tree, and so that honey is really light and pretty much tastes like vanilla icing. So with such a mild flavor, it works really well with things that are good flavorings in cookies, essentially cinnamon, cacao, coffee. All of these things taste really good when mixed with a honey that tastes like vanilla icing. The Brazilian pepper tree is a really probably the biggest source of nectar here on this island. And so that is kind of mild, but nowhere near sweet. Not a very sweet honey. And so that honey mixed really well with the minced chili peppers that the farm I worked for made, and was also a really popular honey that they sold. They sold a 9-ounce jar for $12 and incredibly popular. I just tell people you put it with avocado on toast or cream cheese on crackers and, marinate pork with it. Make sure you tell people how to use it. And it can be really popular having recipe cards that you have printed out. You can get postcards printed from Vistaprint and other online websites very easily. And you have recipe cards made for some of these more unique honeys, and it can really help to sell some of them. And then, if you can have other products, that's great. Whether they're products you're making, like beeswax wraps or t-shirts, but maybe that's even if your friend makes soap, you can buy some soap from her, or maybe she'd even be willing to sell it on consignment, or other products, locally made products that work well for a farmer's market and for the people that would be coming to your table. I like to have some kind of story to tell people. I don't like to talk to everyone, because some people don't want to be bothered, but other people do, and they want you to, tell them about what they're looking at. And I think having a story to tell really helps, especially if they're thinking about a gift they can buy for somebody. When you buy a gift for someone and then you can give it to them, and you have like a story behind what you just gave them to tell them while they're opening their present, that makes it just easier in case they have that look on their face like, why did you just get me this? And so here we have it's pretty touristy. There's a lot of tourists here. We have cruise ships coming in, or we did multiple times a week. But if you're not at a market that's touristy, I don't recommend going to that market every week. Even in the touristy areas, you kind of start to, you're popular, and then it just kind of phases out a little bit. And I've just found that honey is one of those things that people buy and they don't really need for a while. They're just putting it in their tea or something. They're not using a ton of it. So unless it's the holidays, I prefer to do a different market every week. Some markets don't let you do that. You have to just agree to do that same market every single week. But I prefer to jump around and do other markets so that you're seeing different people. And then you come back to that market in a month or so. And of course, nowadays, I don't like to give up my weekends to do markets. I don't really have the time for it or anything. But what I will sometimes do is just a festival. So I'd rather just suck it up for a day and spend more money on a table, but have a table at a festival where there's going to be lots of people and sell a lot of product all day long, and then be done with it and not do another market for another 3 months. Or maybe do a few festivals and stuff, craft fairs during the holiday season. and then not do any for a while. Like, before Mother's Day is also a really popular time to sell honey. And I don't do like every single weekend because I found that it's not always as lucrative. And don't forget to put prices on your products because people don't like to ask how much things are. All right, so before I end this presentation, a little bit about pricing your honey. This can really run the gamut, and I touched on it a little bit before. Trying to be the lowest is really not my recommended way to go. I think it's easier to price your honey high and then to have a sale or a $5 off coupon if you sign up for your newsletter, or $10 off if you follow us on Instagram or whatever, than to try to sell your honey for less than other people. And then there's also the thing that sometimes people see a product too cheap and they want to know what's wrong with it. So, definitely shop around. I look to see what other people are selling their honey at, what other people are selling similar varieties to your honey, whether it is just a mixed blossom or you do have a specific variety. Other raw local honeys, of course, don't look to the grocery store with whatever cheap honey that's not raw, that's probably mostly corn syrup is being sold at, because that's not relevant. I wouldn't recommend going less than $1 an ounce at the very least, and comb honey usually goes for a few dollars more for the jar. There's really nothing wrong with being more expensive than some of the other honeys out there. And don't let people make you feel bad, because really what Beekeeper is making the amount of money that they should be for all the work that they're doing, probably very few. The farm I worked for sold organic honey, and they were still selling a 9-ounce jar for $9. Their 3.5-ounce jar, I think it was like $5. And the smaller jars, like the 1-ounce jar, they sell for $2.50 because you have to make up the cost of the jar. And then once it got bigger, then it was about $1 an ounce. And then once they got to the 47-ounce jars, they sold them for $64 because the jars were a little bit pricier. But that is raw honey, and that is honey from Hawaii, which is not as common, so it's a little bit more rare and it goes for a higher amount. There's a company here called the Rare Hawaiian Honey Company. They sell mesquite honey, which is not Hawaiian or rare, but they have a nice label and they call it rare, and they sell an 8-ounce jar for $32. So honey can really run the gamut, and you can have absolutely no good reason for why you're charging more for your honey than just because you think it's worth it. And my suggestions to you is to not go under $1 an ounce, and to consider how much you're spending on it. So you really need to think about how much you're spending on jars and your labeling, and maybe the cost to be at the market or whatever other costs there might be, because it needs to be worth your while. Otherwise, don't do it, because when it comes down to the holidays and when you're busy and you've got so many other things going on, if you aren't making enough money to be making it worth your while, then you're going to end up hating doing it, and you're not going to keep doing it. If I could just offer some advice, some mistakes that I made these last few years that I now look back on and see that I maybe should have done differently. I would have made it a lot easier for friends and family to support me. I don't know why, but I was kind of secretive about selling my honey. I didn't really talk about it on Facebook. I didn't really make it easy for my family to purchase it. And you know what? I regret that, because once my family, I did put up a website and make a Facebook page and invited people, they were all supportive and they all purchased from me. My uncle sent out an email to all his friends and colleagues, and I got $2,000 in sales in 1 month, and I was doing like 20 bucks at first before that, and not even really making up the cost to put the website up. And then all of a sudden I sold all this honey and I didn't know why. And then I found out that my uncle had just like taken it upon himself to email people and tell them about my website. And so, ask for help. Don't forget to ask for help, and to make it easy for people to be able to help you and to share it with your friends and your family. Don't feel like you're being salesy or, being some kind of sleazy salesperson just because you want to tell people about your product. And another thing is, I wish I hadn't started out with mason jars. And there's nothing wrong with mason jars. They have a great look to them, but I was paying too much for them. I was buying them locally from Target, and I think they were about $1, a little bit more per jar. And then like years later, I talked to a friend who made his own mead, and he told me about a company down the road that sells glass jars in bulk. Now here on this little island, I wasn't expecting to even have a place like that. And you might be able to find them cheaper online, but here we can't have glass jars shipped to us cheaply, because there's no free shipping when you're not in the continental US, pretty much. But if you can find someone at a farmer's market, maybe not with a honey table, but that sells jam or something, that sells them in jars, that's not a canning jar, ask them where they buy them, because there might be a place nearby. Even if they sell wine or meat or something, there might be a place nearby where you can buy your jars in bulk, and you can buy like 10 cases or 30 cases and save a lot of money. I've also found that those hexagon shaped jars, see if I have one, don't have one on my desk right now, but they ship so much better than the mason jars. I've had quite a few mason jars break in shipping, and the hexagon shaped jars pack really well, really tightly together. They're kind of like little puzzle pieces in the box. And it was 3 years before I had some jars break, 2 of them, 2 different packages. And it was just this past Christmas season, which I was expecting, because with COVID, people were shipping so much and the post office was so overwhelmed. I wasn't surprised that that some of the jars broke, but that was just 2 packages at over 3 years. So I strongly recommend looking into whether you can get hexagon shaped jars than the mason jars, because I found that they ship way better. I also tried to sell retail instead of wholesale at first, because I wanted to make more money from my honey and didn't want to lower my price as for wholesale prices. But you make a whole lot more money selling wholesale because you're selling in bulk. So don't be deterred by the fact that you're selling your product for less. And at first I didn't really do too many markets or festivals, but I think that was more of a mistake. I was tired from working for a bee farm all week long, and then trying to do beekeeping on the side to do these festivals and markets on the weekend. But restaurant owners, chefs, there are people that go to farmers markets other than people just looking to buy food. And there are people in the food industry. And so it can be a great way to find someone with a local cafe that loves your honey, that wants to sell it or buy it in bulk. And or with a local store or a chef that wants it at their restaurant. And so it can be a great way to also network, and not just a way to make sales. If you're looking to go online and sell online, not just have an online presence, I really strongly recommend Shopify. I went with WordPress, and I've tried some other websites as well, and Shopify by far is way better and easier, and will get your website more visible, and will be more visible when people search online than if you use other ways to make your website. And I sold my honey by individual jars instead of in the sets. Even just having a 3-pack of the same kind of honey, my Kiawe honey, I just had a 3-pack, just 3 Kiawe honey jars. And then like you say, $2. It just increased my final sale by so much. Or like having the 3-pack with one of each variety. People were buying the 3-pack instead of just one of them, even though they're just saving like $1. It didn't matter. And so I was surprised by it and wasn't expecting it, and really wished I had started it sooner, because these small ways that you can increase your final sale is what's really going to make it worth your while when you're going online or when you're selling at a farmer's market, than trying to just sell like a jar of honey. So I have a lot more information, a lot more lessons learned, things that I did right, things I did wrong, that I have on my YouTube channel. So I don't want to talk too long. So you can find that on YouTube. Just put in a search for Beekeeping Made Simple and you'll find my face. And subscribe to that. I do a lot of live posts about business and the beekeeping and marketing and things like that, because there's not much visual to it, and people can ask questions as I do it. So I hope you subscribe and check that out. And we also have a podcast called The Buzz About Bees. So if you like to listen to podcasts, then you can go to any podcast listening app and do a search for The Buzz About Bees and find us there as well. Thanks for listening, and type in the comments if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Laryssa. That was very interesting. Especially coming all the way from Hawaii. I've been out there. I've been to the Kona Queen Company when Gus was running it, and definitely enjoyed watching the guys working flip-flops and shorts, and having a good time there. So beekeepingmadesimple.com is her, I guess that's your website.
Yep, that's where we have information about beekeeping and some of the crafty beekeeping topics and business of beekeeping, and we have classes and stuff.
Sounds great. If anybody's got any questions, you can hit on the chat box. We'll sit here for a few minutes to see if anybody has any questions. And then I know that your day's probably just getting started over there, or getting midway. And ours is ending over here. So
yeah, I know it's getting late for you guys, huh?
Yeah.
I saw one person says, how do chefs use comb honey?
Yeah, go ahead.
Larry asked, how do chefs use comb honey? The one photo has it on display at the breakfast buffet. They were really adamant about having that. They saw it at another resort in Thailand. And comb honey, I think, is probably more popular here because we have a lot of tourists from Japan, and honey and comb honey seems to be a really popular thing in Japan right now. But I had a restaurant contact me. They wanted to buy comb for their dessert bar, their ice cream bar. I sell a lot of comb honey to this one. She has a catering company. She does a lot of brunches at this really fancy gated community and weddings. And so she has these really fancy breakfast platters. She puts the comb with cheese and crackers and stuff. So yeah, I'm definitely fortunate in that there's a lot of like really high-end restaurants and resorts and places like that where they just want that unique thing that a lot of people haven't seen before, that they're adding to their platters. Mostly though, it's breakfast related things.
We're seeing that a little bit in our high-end restaurants too.
Yeah, someone in California told me that they see it at a breakfast restaurant. The tricky part, if anyone ever wants to ship it, I found that the wax nuke boxes from Man Lake is what I use. and I put them in those big vacuum seal bags because you can make them as long as you need to. I'll put a frame of comb in there and then just seal it on either end. And I'll put 4 in a nuke box, a wax nuke box, and that's how I ship it to like Inner Island. I'm not allowed to ship it, I don't think, to the mainland, though I don't know if it would survive anyway. And then I have to get it inspected by the USDA, so it's quite a process, but they're willing to pay for it. I've even had actually one person want to buy it for their babies. They call them luau's here, but it was like their first birthday party, and their luau's are really a big thing here in Hawaii. So that's why I have one YouTube video about this, but I really can't recommend enough knowing other local beekeepers. Because when you become like that person that does that one thing, like I am the person that does comb honey, then whenever a beekeeper gets a request for that, then I'm the person that they contact. And that's incredibly helpful because you can't do everything, you know.
Well, we sure do appreciate your time and all the interesting stuff you had. And it's good to hear from another place than just here in the continental states, you know. Get to hear from Hawaii and what they do, and it was definitely enjoyable. If you'll make sure that Stephen has all your information, we'll get that posted onto our Collin County page so that if anybody's interested, they can get onto your podcast or onto your website, and we'll make sure that you have lots of chances to answer questions and maybe get some of our guys watching you.
Okay, thanks. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. All right, this concludes our meeting. We appreciate everybody coming on board, and like I said, we thank Laryssa for what she's done. We'll get the information posted to our site on Facebook, and we will. So that way, if you have any questions or concerns, you know, with or something you want to know about Hawaii beekeeping, you can definitely find out from her, since she's doing it right there in Hawaii. So thank you very much, and we'll conclude this meeting. Thanks.